There you go. Okay.
Across, I was like,
Call the meeting to order.
Mr. Chair, there are no other business items received in advance of the meeting.
Okay. First item.
The first item on the agenda is the minutes of the Council and Committee meeting held on Monday, April 4th, 2016. The recommendation is that the committee approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Councillor Marsden, seconded by Councillor Towner. All in favor? Any opposed? And it carries unanimous. Lee.
Item 2 is a delegation. I would like to invite Ms. Charrise Millan to please come forward. Ms. Millan will be speaking to the proposed construction planning of Princeton Park.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Millan, please come and join us. And I believe the clerk has told you have 5 minutes for presentations, and then we may have questions following that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council. I thank you for this opportunity to speak regarding Princeton Park. I've been a resident there for 2 years because some of the area in the west side of Burke Mountain had been built, I believe, existing. Sorry, I'm not used to this. I believe the end of Trafalgar and Millard, the homes were 5 to 8 years old. My particular house was 2 years old, and then some of the west side over by Marguerite and further down had been there for 10 or even 20 years. My concern, starting with Princeton Park, for one, I'd prefer it to be called Trafalgar Park because there's too many areas of Princeton, and then people would know exactly where Trafalgar is because it's just such a small road. But we're a very strong community. I'm representing basically my neighbors. I did not get a written confirmation from all my neighbors, but I've spoken with really pretty much all of my Trafalgar neighbors, and I know some of my Princeton and some Marguerite neighbors. But our concern is, for one, when initially the Princeton Park was addressed last year, we had a very short space, just to go back and reflect, regarding making our opinion to the fire hall. The sign was put on the billboard in front of Princeton Park 2 days before the Sunday fire hall meeting, and it was a bit, I did discuss it with the girl in the planning department, and it was unfortunate it did not go up 2 weeks before it went up a day and a half. And so that I found was very unfortunate because it did not give us as the residents enough opportunity to go to the fire hall and discuss things, and there were so many different parks on that agenda that day. So my concern with my neighbors is that when I currently filming a movie, which or a TV show, which I'm a fan of, so that's fine. We're all involved in the movie that's across the street, and so the proposal, when I phoned the lady who was your department handling the movie or the film representation, she had mentioned to me that the building had already been up on the website regarding the proposal for Princeton, and so I did not know that, so I followed through and looked at the website. She had mentioned she wasn't sure regarding the 2 trees. We have, I don't know whether they're 50 to 100 foot trees in the Princeton Park, and I had discussed with the planning manager as well. I had made a call after I had been aware of that the plans were up, and he said that he was not sure regarding the arborist proposals whether they would be viable trees. And I'm here to speak. I'm not a naturalist 100%, but it's a lovely environment on the west side of Burke Mountain. Is like no other place in Coquitlam. I've been in Coquitlam pretty much since 1991, most of these years, so I know it very well from the beginning roots to when there were farms, and then there all of a sudden are no farms. So we want to keep the 2 trees if we can at all possible, and then the proposal for half of the park on the Trafalgar and Princeton side is going to be designated, from my understanding, a community park. My suggestion last year at the fire hall, and then this year, as well as all my neighbors that I've spoken to on Trafalgar, we want to ensure that it is a garden park. We'd like
the community garden.
Well, not necessarily a community garden. That was a suggestion, and I had talked to yourself about that. And there is a community garden at the end of Princeton, past Marguerite. But unfortunately, there's a 2-year waiting list because I've been on there since, and I have not had any opportunity to take a community garden. Whereas the other land adjacent is under the developer's purview, and so I have no means to do that. But we really want to keep it a quiet garden, something similar to Pipeline, the way they have a mini Bouchard garden, shall we say. The thing for us as owners and tenants or whatnot in our west side of Coast Meridian, it's a little different than the east side by Smiling Creek. There's a lot more newer family homes being built and different dynamics, whereas ours are half and half, old and new. Most of our residents are over 65%. I'm based on my 2 years experience, and I know you would have some dynamics about, you currently today have things about parking and what parking zones and how many square footage for different parts of Coquitlam. But the dynamics are most of the residents are 55 years and older. And that is a huge amount. There's very few catchments in all of Coquitlam that have older residents. This is one of them. The other one I think would be Poirier, and around central Coquitlam would have a lot of older residents. But with our dynamics, only say 20% are 35-year-olds, because you rarely find any people that can afford up to, for the homes at least. There's other townhouses having $1 million properties. So you would have adults who had worked their whole lives to be able to afford homes in there. And so our position, my particular one, I have adult children at home, and my neighbors, some of them have children. My 2 next door neighbors have younger children, but they both have seniors living in their basement. And so at least 15%, the way I'm looking at my neighborhood, are 70 years old. So I want to make a plan on the west side of Trafalgar and Princeton. They were going to have a tot park, and my address to my people that I've talked to in my neighborhood, we absolutely do not want a tot park. For one, you're not addressing the 55 and older to 70-year-old residents. You're not making anything. You're not considering us as we age. In the next 10 years, I'll be 65. And we don't really want a tot park. Plus, based on, I did not have time, I was working and busy for the past few weeks, regarding the tot park. So Trafalgar and Princeton, Trafalgar and Millard, there is a huge park there. Millard Orchard Park has a basketball court and a tot park. So it's 1 block away from the proposed Princeton Park and Millard Park. 1 block, so many parents in schools say their children don't get enough exercise and are not walking enough and doing that. And if they can't walk 1 block to a park, I think there's an issue.
I'm going to have to wrap, and I'm going to get our general manager of Parks to respond to some of these. So if you had a couple others you want to get out quickly, then we'll add them to the list.
Get out quickly because I was printing off little Google Maps, and so there is Millard Orchard Park to the south of Trafalgar, and Watkins is to the north, another block away, a green space with a tot park. Another 2 blocks from that, or a block and a half, depending upon how you want to look at it, there is, I'm trying to remember, it's the Marguerite Watkins Park along the back of the trail where the duck pond. So within 25-kilometer zone, there's 1, 2, 3 green spaces for children. And that's not even crossing Coast Meridian to the east side, where we have the wonderful new parks, Queenston Park and Galloway, which is another 5 minutes walk in any direction. And so we're saying enough. We have a lot of deer and birds. That's why we want to keep the trees and that kind of area, and we wanted to make 100%.
Okay, I'm going to see if we have a response from our general manager of Parks, Rec, and Culture. Charrise, can you? Sorry, I didn't know if we had a slide or anything of the concept plan. I know in anticipation of the presentation, which was originally scheduled for last meeting, we had asked that maybe we could have something here just to put up on the board. And I'm sorry if we had it. It may have been helpful during this discussion to have it up on the board for council to see. But we'll get it up now so you're speaking to it.
Maybe number 2.
Yeah,
just start there.
But maybe just back up just to slide one, just to show the context, because our resident did reference the Millard Orchard here.
Yes.
And Princeton there.
Yeah, there's the green space 2 blocks away, and then 2 blocks to the left is another large park with lots.
That's the existing one down there. And then on the other side, of course, Coast Meridian, we of course have the new Queenston Park, which opened last year, and Galloway, the one with the spray pool, spray park. Yep, and the future park.
So we're looking for a senior park.
Well, I think
Okay, I'll just let walk us through this and maybe where we are with the planning process, the consultation process to date, and maybe just touch on the trees as well, because that's always a concern when we get into one of these projects.
So there's this is the site known as Princeton Park. The project did go to council and the committee late last year. This is the concept that was presented to council. That concept is since then is being evolved to a more detailed planning stage. So we've dedicated some dollars to using some funding to get the plan, and we would get the detailed design plan back to council based on this concept in the very near future. The concept presented here and shown here was shown to council late last year based on a consultation that we did in the neighborhood, and we did have signs in the area. I know that the speakers indicated a sign was not put up perhaps as quickly as should have been, but we did get a number of people that did come to the open house at the fire hall. I think it was noted that, and it was as part of the attachments to council at that time, I think we had in the order of 32 respondents. I think a number of them, I think at least a third of them said they came because of the sign on the park. So a number of people did see the park sign and were represented. If I just to remind council, playground and park components, as well as open lawn areas and gathering spaces and seating areas were kind of the 3 top elements that were discussed by the community. Floral displays were also behind that, and we are noting a number of floral displays at the entry features here in the park to try and cover that part of the park programming. If you perhaps, if I could ask the clerk to just go back to the slide with this context. Yeah. So. Yes, there's a number of smaller parks in the area. If you look at the area north of Princeton, that's all townhousing type of housing, and that's where actually the Green Street is. There's a lot of children in this area, so there's a mix of residents. There are a number of older resident community kind of represented here, including some more mature residents, but we are getting a lot of mixed residents, including families, including couples. We're getting all sorts, and what it's telling us is that building for the land uses that are represented here, and this is single-family land uses, and generally we do get families drawn, and that's why play spaces are still represented in most of our neighborhood parks as a component to be considered in the park programming. The consultation we did show that there are people that want those play spaces, and that's why it was presented to council in the concept. That said, we have identified a part of this park along the easterly side to remain as open lawn. It's not entirely a big playground. And again, if I could ask the clerk to go to that slide, please. So there's an informal grass area. There's a bit of a separation. There's a bit of a slope through the site. So you'll see that the 6 and 12-year-old play area is there's a great separation. We have shown some featured trees. We can certainly look at adding some additional landscaping to try and create a bit more of a formalized and a little bit more secluded area along the east, as per the speaker's comments. We're quite prepared to look at that, but we're also looking to make sure, and that's part of the featured trees as you see in the bottom area, was really to create a bit more of a passive space, a little bit more private. We could certainly look to optimize that. You'll see the 2 trees there, the 2 existing trees that are shown. Our intent was to try and retain them, but as with trees, it's a natural element. And what we need to do is, as we go forward with a detailed design, and then eventually into the construction phase, we would get an arborist assessment completed on those. I believe they're in decent shape, but trees can decline quickly depending on the situation. So we have to continue to look at them, make sure they remain safe, and if they can be retained, we would retain them. But that's something we need to consider further in the detailed planning of the site. So I'm certainly taking the speaker's comments in mind when we look at the detailed design. What I could take from this is we could actually try to optimize that informal space and make it as kind of not secluded, but a place that maybe can be slightly separated from the play space in a way that doesn't create any kind of septet or security issues. We can do that through some landscaping, and we can certainly do some work as we've proposed to do on the floral display kind of side of the equation, which we've already accounted for in the plan, but we'll try to enhance that as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I have questions from Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Ms. Millan. Did you see the Parks Department report that listed what the public feedback was and what the preference was?
I did not view it online, but I discussed it with him, and it was extremely, extremely minimal. It's like 90% people did not come out in the community. It was so small for that day.
Yeah, so you did see it. I wanted to make sure. You haven't seen it yet, so we can get you a copy of it. But
sure.
You're already saying it's really not representative.
No, it's not
What I think I heard the general manager say, is that this plan represents not only the desires that we got from 32 respondents. I've got the detailed list in front of me here, but also the department's analysis of the needs for the area based on that large population that's to the north there that's not serviced by playgrounds and things like that. So I think he said that it's a combination of the two of them. Both of them were pointing towards the need for some playground equipment there. So do you understand that?
No, I do, but I'm also looking at all the adults in the community that their children go to Terry Fox Secondary and there's no bus service. I'm looking at the 70-year-olds that live in the neighborhood because it's a extended family, and that's not being addressed at all.
So the general manager also said he's going to take a look to see if there can be better use to reflect your concerns of the informal grass area, more formal garden.
Yes.
But are you saying you don't want any playground there at all?
Based on every one of my neighbors that I talked on Trafalgar, the answer is no. It was, there were so many deer and birds around that park. We want that to continue to be quiet. I mentioned the park at south of town center where they have a natural garden and actually beehives. That would be more inducive. Town Center Park, you have concrete blocks where people bring in their checkers, or have a ping pong concrete block where people play ping pong. That would be more conducive, because just adjacent to the left of Marguerite, there's a lady who does a Hit the Hills and does a Tai Chi and exercise fitness program in that area. That would be more conducive to what the neighbors have.
Maybe the general manager could tell me, how big is that informal grass area? Is that like 20 meters by 20 meters, 30 meters by 30 meters, something like that?
I'm not sure I have. I don't have the specific size, but I think something we did raise along the lines of the space available is that this is not a very large park. I think this is a 0.7 acre park in total. It really is not conducive to proper programming in two significantly different directions. One is outdoor recreation programming, like picnic tables or like ping pong tables, for instance, outdoor equipment for exercising. You need a large area to do that. If you wanted to do an inspiration type of garden, like again, we would need a whole bunch of different amenity space, and we'd have to consider different kind of servicing for it, infrastructure, and again, we do have plans. Currently, there is a community garden on the ranch property, as council is aware. Our goal is to try and retain that and to actually expand it, if possible, as part of that plan. That's something we will ultimately be looking at. So we do have in mind the fact that community gardens continue to be an amenity that people do desire. So we have a plan looking forward for that. This park, as we've highlighted in the report, we have to do a couple of things well in this park. We can't do 3 or 4 things very well in this park. The community here is a growing community. It is a community that will ultimately draw families, a whole range of people, but certainly the housing form here will draw families. It will draw children. There are children in the area. Playgrounds, amongst others, but playgrounds and playground equipment was highly ranked as part of the consultation that we did, and we believe that it can coexist with a passive area in this form that can provide residents a variety of experiences in the park, and that's still our goal, and that's what the detailed design that we're moving towards is doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions? I'll go to Terry. Councillor Connor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming in today to share your ideas and concerns about this. I just wanted to share with you, yesterday my kids and I and a few other people, we spent 3 hours at Cottonwood Park.
Okay.
Which is I don't know, it's similar in size, I'm guessing, by looking at here. And we were there about 3 hours, and it's sunny, and there's a passive informal grass area at one end. And the teenagers were playing, we were playing pickup soccer and shooting baskets. The tot lot was filled with kids. There was lots and lots of kids there. And the entire time we were there, I couldn't help but notice that in the grassy area there were more mature residents enjoying the benches and being pushed in their wheelchairs and enjoying the quieter space.
Yes.
And it was actually very wonderful to see the different areas of the park and how well used they were. So I'd like to think that if this goes ahead as planned, that folks such as yourself wouldn't feel that you can't utilize the space.
I appreciate that very much, but both my neighbors on both sides have small children, and they are vehemently against it because there's just so many choices and so many areas that they prefer to walk or even drive. But I wanted to put forth, and I appreciate you listening to my voice and my neighbors from Trafalgar, because we wanted to address these issues, because tots are only tots for a couple of years, and they grow up very big, and then, like I said, there is such a great amount of students that are going to Terry Fox Secondary. And they have to go all the way down the hill, all the way down to Terry Fox, and they would be a consideration too. For me, I prefer the whole thing, because if it is such a small area of 7.7 acres, to do one thing 100%, because I'd rather it done well than done mishmash. But that will be your decision. But I know that it could be properly done with the two dynamics. But it's such a quiet area. You can't imagine the birds and just the deer all across. And I wanted to put forth that should be considered, that it could be just a quiet space, because heaven forbid we don't have enough breathing time, quiet space, and sometimes that's all we need.
Okay. Councillor Connor, anything further?
No.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming in today. I'm a parent of one of those 3 Fox kids from that neighborhood.
Yes.
So, and you're right, they do grow up quickly. My kids enjoyed the adventure playground, and then yesterday they were out with 12 of their friends on the sport court.
Yes.
Just down there. So it's great to see the amenities in that neighborhood, and I appreciate you coming in today to give us your feedback on the neighborhood. And I appreciate the general manager of Parks saying that he will take into account some of your ideas when working to how we're going to work around some of those passive areas in the park. And our parks, our surveys show that the parks are rated very highly, like top on the list, and about what people want in the parks, and we try to provide a great range of amenities. I think our staff do an excellent job of planning and running our parks, so thank you to our staff for the work they have done and the ongoing work, and thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you
very much for your time.
Item 3 is the citywide parking review of ground-oriented multifamily developments and single-family homes. We have introductory comments by the General Manager Planning Development, and the report is before you for information and feedback. Staff are also recommending they be directed to bring forward an amendment bylaw recommending first reading and consultation with the development industry, neighborhood associations, and other affected parties on a series of zoning bylaw amendments as noted in points A through F on the agenda.
Okay, we have a staff presentation, so maybe we'll hear that, and then we'll make the recommendations afterwards, because in case there's any changes. So, Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. From parks to parking. Just a few introductory comments. The report's quite straightforward, so we'll more to receive council's feedback. If there's any questions today, we can certainly try to respond. Council may recall that we obviously this has been an ongoing concern and topic of discussion for some months now. A report had been prepared and brought forward to council late in 2015 that laid out some of the issues and tried to get a bit of a sounding from council on the items to follow up on, which we've done, and that is the product of today's report. There's been a staff team led by Michael Dhaliwal, our special projects planner, with some assistance from outside consultants for some analysis of other municipalities. And so that team has done the research, done some analysis, and now coming forward with a recommendation today is sort of a multi-phase program. And the first phase was some specific identified zoning bylaw amendments to our parking standards for council's consideration. And if you're content with that, we would want to move forward with those sort of immediate quick fixes, if you will, in conjunction with some focused consultation leading up to a public hearing for that text amendment. The other parts of the program, two other areas of work would be on the servicing standards. That's the street and roadscape design standards, and making sure those are designed and laid out in the most efficient way possible, so you're not creating problems for yourself in the future in the placement of fire hydrants, for example, or utility kiosks and that. So that's the second piece that Michael can speak to. And then as well, there's some other items, maybe a little more contentious. Certainly we can follow up on them, and our suggestion there is that would merit some further review and time to tackle that. So that's what we have for you today.
Good, thank you. Mr. Galloway, did you have anything that you wanted to add at this time, or should we go straight to questions?
Straight to questions.
Okay, I have myself, Dennis, May, and Councillor Neal on here. Okay. First of all, looking through the report here, on page 3, I noticed that 4 of 13 municipalities have, this is right at the bottom of page 3, and it talks about required parking spaces being used solely for a vehicle. And we hear this all the time, that residents in certain areas use the garage for parking and the cars aren't in the garage. And I've always sort of been led to believe that that's really getting into an area that's very hard to enforce. But yet I note that in your municipal scan, 4 of 13 municipalities do have a provision requiring the spaces be used solely for parking.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. And we contacted those municipalities to see, and they also struggle with enforcement. Is the big challenge. They do have it in their zoning bylaw that parking must be utilized for parking, and then it becomes an enforcement issue following that.
Is that in a residential, single family, or in multifamily that exists?
It's a stipulation for all required parking spaces.
Okay. So just a couple of things I just want to touch on. Some of this we've covered before. I took a couple of pictures up on Burke, and I just want to sort of go through them with staff. If we can we load up the first picture here? I think we've got about 4 pictures here together, because they illustrate some of the points and some of the things that I'd like to see us talk about and cover in there. Maybe while we're loading that up, I can go to my next point. Okay, so this is a slide that I showed council, I guess almost a year ago or 6 months ago, about the placement of the fire hydrants. And I note in the report we talk about it, and I'm just wondering, you know, like we've had this discussion for as long as I've been on council, and this was a neighborhood that's probably 2 years old now. It's still an issue. Maybe we can go to the next slide. 2 weeks ago, I went up onto Sheffield, brand new subdivision. The curbs and stuff went in maybe 2 months ago, and I'm finding the same thing. Once again, a brand new subdivision after we've been having this discussion, and the fire hydrants, instead of being moved into here, where they can't park anyway, same up there, it sits right in the middle of where there's prime parking. I'm just wondering why we keep having this, bring it forward illustrations. Is there some technical reasons or something that's going on? Because it's just, for me personally, I find it kind of frustrating to see this, especially in the early stages.
Just initially from my perspective, and Michael might have a little more direct knowledge, obviously, yes, this has been flagged before. It is more top of mind, is my understanding, when those streetscape design, those servicing design drawings are being prepared and reviewed. There may be some technical requirements in terms of offsets, and there might be other infrastructure, like for example here you see a catch basin right near the driveway, and there may be works that are there that you have to stay clear of with the water main and the fire hydrant lead. But we are mindful of that, and I will remind staff to be watching that closely. But Michael, was there anything further in your discussions with our development servicing or engineering staff around that one?
To the chair, that's part of the reason why we recommend this as phase 2. We'd have to look at how all utilities are being placed. As the general manager pointed out, there's usually conflicts with other utilities that are in the ground.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, but the speed at which we're developing them up there, and the fact that after 4 years of time, I'm just afraid that by the time we get a policy and get this all resolved, half the mountain is built up and we don't have the parking. So I just want to flag it again, and I'll just leave it there. We'll go on to the next slide, because that illustrates another thing. This one here is really interesting, because this one, it's single family, rear load, parking's at the back. We've got garages. I can never tell if they're a one-car or a two-car garage. But what is evident is between the homes, we have 2 parking spaces. However, the property line is here. So if nobody does anything here, this neighbor can park 2 cars here. But on the other side of the garage, he's parking his car on his neighbor's 24 inches. And it's just because we have to provide these setbacks on the building lines for the garages. And this all works well until you look at the next slide here, when somebody builds this on their 24 inches, and therefore now we can no longer get the 2 cars in between. And this person is completely within its right to build right up into his property line, but he's essentially blocked his neighbor from having 2 spots. And so I don't know if there's somewhere during all this we can look at somehow going to a 0 lot line on garages, because from a building code, they're all still equally separated. It's just they all uniformly move over to be on the property line. And I think that's something that I'd like us to look at. And we maybe go to the next one here. The parking, many of these pads aren't paved. And so what one resident was complaining to me says that the gravel starts to spill over onto the road and creates an issue, because the cars are going in and out over essentially a curb. The next one. Next slide. That's one where it's really sort of almost to the point that it's burying the curb. And on the last slide, it's just up the 2 doors up where somebody's actually finished theirs off and put the parking in. So I just wanted to sort of, having this discussion, it was an opportunity to bring some examples. So often we look at these at the blueprint stage or the DP stage, and I just thought it was interesting to go back in and look at one of these 2 years later to see what's working and what's not working. And I'll just leave that with you. I have others, but I have others on the list, so we'll go to Dennis, or to Councillor Marsden, and then over to Councillor Reid. Councillor Marsden.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge did touch on one that was a concern for me, and that's on the top of page 3. It says, point 2, we're going to do a review of city servicing to ensure streetscape and road standards are creating livable streetscapes to maximize parking, and the fire hydrant placement goes directly against point number 2. So I welcome further review, but in the immediate, in terms of immediate actions, I think we've got to move forward with this immediately. We cannot wait another year as the roads are being put in to say, you know, we're missing out on opportunities for visitors to park in front of the homes that they're visiting. So I think that's something that needs to be accelerated. Overall, I was happy with the pieces you got coming back here. I think it addressed some of the biggest pressing issues that we've got, not counting tandem parking with regard to secondary suites, carriage homes, and garden cottages. Thrilled to see that we are going to potentially land there. That's great. I do like the piece as well about having in some visitor spaces for the RTM1s, the strata row house developments, to have visitor spaces and the increase from 1.5 to 2. I think those are two long overdue solutions, and I'm very happy to see them. I did have a question with regards to the RT2 zoning, the townhouse, and starting to count by stories as opposed to meters. And I think in our RS zoning, we look at a maximum height of a house at 11 meters. Yet if we start to get into the row home or the townhome, we're going to propose that we count in stories. Does that open the door up for all of a sudden we've got townhomes well over 11 meters because someone decides they want 11-foot vaulted ceilings? Are we not opening up an avenue that we perhaps don't want there?
Through the chair, the RT2 zone, the townhouse zone, currently measures height in stories, and the max is 2.5 on the downhill portion on a sloping site. Otherwise, all townhouses are 2-story maximum. Because we're changing the parking rates of the RTM1 to correspond to the RT2, I was just transferring both zones operate pretty similarly, so we were changing it to stories for some design flexibility, and we'd be covering off some of the impacts of height through setback requirements on the 3rd story to reduce the magnitude on the opposing adjacent residents.
So is that going to be easier to manage for staff and for the development industry to deal with stories versus height and meters?
Through the chair, yes, it'll make processing applications easier on staff and for the developers to understand the maximum height. As well, we believe through design guidelines and some zoning specific changes, we can ensure that the massing is still appropriate for the neighborhood.
If I could, Mr. Chair, this is one too staff were frankly wrestling with as well, because on one hand, if you're going to go to the 2 parallel parking stalls, wide units, you're taking away floor area. How can you accommodate that? So you're going to increase the height. So that's sort of some of the preliminary response we've heard from developers and the builders. But on the other hand, we have to be mindful we're not going to have overpowering, rows of townhouses side by side, stepping down the site. So I think the focus here is to address the parking, the 2 stalls per unit, which by and large is the standard out there. So we should probably be playing by the same rules. If in the end that's what it leads to, a little higher product. That's we think is acceptable trade-off. Though noting you might end up with bigger units. Now your bigger units, what are you doing to affordability? So you can push sort of one element, but that might push back in another area.
Yeah, there are a lot of levers that you've got here. Again, I get the direction we're trying to go here. The one concern I have, because we do hear it from residents, that 11-meter heights on homes is the wrong thing to go in our RS1s. So my concern is if people are concerned about 11 meters being too high in RS1, that we're not opening the door for 12 meters and 13 meters in our RTMs.
And are we?
And are we? Does this open up?
Fair enough. I guess just a little further on that. The one saving grace, if you will, is that with the townhouses and the RTMs, there is a development permit that gets at the forming character, the siting, the landscaping, as opposed to some of the larger single family where there is no development permit. So we have a little more ability to influence that. But it is a fair comment.
Okay, thank you. And your previous response, you talked about the dual parking. So what we're talking about in the removal of the tandem is related to the RS zones and counting tandems for the carriage homes, the suites, et cetera, correct? So we would still be willing in townhomes to look at counting tandem because typically you're dealing with one family unit and moving their own vehicles, correct?
Through the chair. Currently, townhouses do not count tandem parking spaces. If they're in a tandem configuration, we still count it only as one stall. So these amendments would actually require townhouses to be side-by-side parking, so 20-foot wide townhouses at a minimum. And if council does not feel comfortable with that direction, we would be looking at tandem parking for townhousing to accommodate 2 spaces.
Okay. I was understood that we would still contemplate tandem for townhome because you start to get to 20-foot wide. Again, form and function gets very different. So I have to give that one a thought. Thank you.
Again, if I could, that's, and we know that too.
Yeah.
And in fact, some of the discussion for projects sort of in process right now, it's, it's recognized as a challenge in dealing with that, going to that higher standard. Is it parking on site that's, allocated? So it's not just, you're not just doing the calculation of 1.5 per unit, it's actually it's a 2 per unit calculation, but maybe that second parking stall is elsewhere on the site. So if there's an interest, we can explore that too. Obviously, we don't want to, lock in difficult solutions, but
I'd just like to have options available. I think back to days when I lived in a townhouse, a number of the units had a single carport, and their secondary stall was on another part of the complex. There was some rows of parking, and there were some assigned stalls that were corresponding. So again, give the options that could be available. I want to see that we have 2 per unit, absolutely. If there's some configurations that work there, I'm open to them. But I'm thrilled to see that we're not going to count them as secondary suites parking stalls. Thank you.
Okay, I have Councillor Reid and then Councillor Wilson.
Okay, well, I'll stick on the...
No, I'm after Councillor Reid.
Pardon?
I'm sorry, I didn't have you down. Okay, I had Councillor Reid, then I'll go to Councillor on the other. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'll stick on the townhouses for now. I, too, was concerned about the height that you're getting into, but I think that we do have to have 2 units each. But something else that Dennis was speaking about is having parking aside, as you called it, aside, somewhere else on the complex. And everybody speaks about affordability, but affordability is also being able to park on your own property and not have to park somewhere and walk 3 blocks to get home. I think that we have to look at something that has visitor parking, and I'd look to even higher standards than you've got, but that could be inclusive of a certain number of other stalls if someone wanted to rent them or whatever. So I think that there's quality of living and quality of neighborhoods are also a feature that goes into selling things. And I'm tired of people trying to take a lot that's not quite big enough or not quite wide enough and squeezing something onto it. They're just going to have to let one lot go and use it for something that's going to enhance the rest of the complex. In your vehicle ownership by planning area, this made me giggle. Not much does these days, but that did. So it's talking about vehicle ownership per occupied dwelling, and I notice it stops at 2. Is that correct? You've got under 1 to 1.24. Anyhow, what about the people who have 4 teenagers and 6 cars? And don't tell me there's only 1 or 2 around town, because there's at least 1 on every block.
Through the chair, this map is showing the average in each planning area, and no average in a planning area was above 2 spaces per household on average in one of the planning areas, and that's why it stops at 2. But you are correct, there are houses that have more than 2 spaces, they just not for the entire area.
And if ICBC did this, no wonder my fees are going up, because they're missing out about 2/3 of the cars in Coquitlam. I mean, you can't drive down any street where you don't see homes with teenagers with 2 extra cars, and they're parked out on the street, and because there's no room in the garage and all that stuff. So that concerns me. I guess the other things, what they do in other municipalities, when you start going with Surrey and White Lake and stuff like that, in flat communities, we're building the side of a mountain, and I think for parking we have more difficulties than you do in Surrey, where it's all flat, or a lot of it's flat in their new area. So I don't think we can really look at our parking issues alongside of a community like that. On page 2, you mentioned that the zoning bylaw does not require enough off-street parking spaces to meet the demand. I have no intention of providing off-street parking. I mean on-street parking for people. So I keep saying to you, when we talk about parking, please drop. When you come to me with 3 developments all on the same street and you count the same 10 spaces for every development, it makes me crazy. So I do not want to count on-street parking on any of this. I mean, it's nice to know it's available, but we've got 3 developments and 10 spaces used 3 times. That's 30, and 20 cars are going to be SOL. On page 3, what are we going to do in your phased approach? Number 1, the immediate actions. I get that. And I would assume that that is going to be changing the zoning from 1.5 to 2 immediately. Okay. And then your servicing standards are what Craig was talking about. You're going to be working with engineering on moving, yeah? And what are the other broader parking-related issues that require further analysis, other than counting the teenagers' cars?
Through the chair, that would be
Just what you've got on the back.
Attachment 4 list, and if council feels we should pursue any of these other options.
Okay. And as far as the height goes, I don't want to get myself into that position where I could have like a 20-unit complex along one road that's a full story higher than the single-family houses that would be around it. That wouldn't be nice. That would be just like a brick wall. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Neill, then Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, some points of clarification and some general comments and questions as well. On your recommendation 2A, you talk about increased parking standard for townhomes and row homes from 1.5 to 2. But I think, did I not see elsewhere in this report that the standard is for row homes is 1, not 2?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. It's row homes is from 1 to 2. My apologies.
2 is incorrect. Also on page 5, the first paragraph then, townhome and row home parking requirements. You got the note about the parking requirements for the Evergreen Line core and shoulder areas, and you talk there about how those can be reduced with transportation management measures. I believe that what council passed several years ago was a general, no questions asked reduction in those areas from 1.5 for 2-bedroom to 1.35, and then with moto, car share, and other things, it can go below 1.35. So am I wrong there? I don't think so. So go ahead.
Through the chair, yes, you're correct.
Thank you. Okay. So those 2 things, and then the lack, I think, of a careful presentation to council about. I think we need to be walked through this stuff, and I think the public needs to see this as well. You talk to a member of the public. What's the difference between a row home and a townhome? Maybe you should tell us so that people know. What's the difference between a row home and a townhome?
Through the chair, a row home and a townhome on the ground look very similar. The intention of the row home zone is to give an option of fee simple lots and strata row homes on access from a public lane. In a townhouse development, they're usually accessed internally from a private lane system.
Okay. So we need to know that so we understand why there might have been differences in the parking requirements and regulations that we had in place, and then have that information in our heads so we know that when we're going forward, well, why were the regulations put in place that way to begin with? Why were they different, and now why are we thinking we need to change them? I don't think we have that context here. What we also, I think, don't have, and this is something that I think Councillor Reid anticipated here, is the financial impact of requiring more parking spaces in townhomes per se, or row homes or whatever. We know that we hear quite often in an apartment complex to build an underground parking space is $40,000. That's what we heard, and that's one of the reasons that we've said, you know, if you're near SkyTrain, you don't have to build as many parking spaces for your condominiums because you're not likely to have those two cars. You're likely to have just one, and so you don't need that space. And we should require builders to build extra spaces, and the spaces are going to go empty. And so a lot of it is to do with the cost. You know, of course, the end of our report here, financial implications for the city, no financial implications. But the financial implications for where it's going to be felt out there are profound. This will add expense and considerable expense to housing types where there's going to be needed, this would require extra parking. So we need to discuss that too, okay? And that's not part of this report in any sort of way. We also have, now by the way, I kibitzed a little when Councillor Reid was talking, and I apologize for that. But when we take a look at average home ownership, car ownership per home, it's exactly what it is. It's average. Of course there's going to be some homes with 3 or 4 or 5 cars, but when we get the average of 2, that means there's some homes with no cars or 1 cars. And as a matter of fact, there'll be more cars with more homes with 1 car to balance off those homes that do exist with 5. So we're just looking at averages. And I don't think we can expect any zoning regulation to take into account the worst case scenario, which is a house with 4 teenagers, each one with a car, and both parents having cars, 6 cars there. So every house on every street has to have parking space for 6. No, I mean, it's an average. You got to work on the averages. So I think that was the implication of what was going there. So one other thing, and it's perhaps because this report was already in the works, when something came to mind, I think it was because Councillor Towner raised an issue on a small development that came before us a couple of months ago, dealing with ended up being 1 carport and 1 garage, because there had been a quirk in the wording, I think, of one of our zoning regulations or something that, did you remember this, Councillor Towner, that made that builder think that, I can only build one car garage here, but I have to provide an extra parking space, so I'll make a carport. And that ended up actually leading to a lot of us thinking, well, that's kind of felicitous, because if it's a carport, we know people are going to park there because they can't store there. And this leads to this inability to force people to use their garages to park their cars, and how difficult that is to enforce. So to my question here, at least means to my question, was any consideration given to looking at either that second site being not in a garage and off-site, or like a couple 10, 15, 20 meters away in a common thing, or carported, not closed in. That would at least cut back on costs and things like that. It opened a whole new door to the way to consider parking issues and also the affordability issues when we looked at carports instead of closed-in garages.
Through the chair, in a strata development, they do have the flexibility of putting 1 parking space in the townhouse unit and another one in a surface parking spot somewhere else on the site. In a single-family house, there's no requirement that they must be in a garage. If the developer chooses, they can have 1 in a carport, 1 in a garage, and 1 in a parking pad, or any combination thereof.
And row homes?
Through the chair. Row homes would also have the flexibility of parking 1 in a garage attached to the unit and another one elsewhere on the site.
They would have that, and would have that under these changes.
Through the chair, that is correct.
All right. I had one more, just a minute. Had a lot of notes here.
I have one I forgot.
Yeah, I'll come back to you. I skipped some things too.
Oh, so I do quite agree with, I just want to say, the no longer counting tandem as recognized parking stall for secondary suites, carriage, or garden cottages, especially when that tandem space is on a driveway right in front of a 2-car garage. That just never made any sense to me. And I don't have a problem with with a provision that might lead to some increase in height. I think the big problem comes when there's one huge house stuck in the middle of a lot of smaller homes. But when there's a whole development that's large, it's no different than being next to a medium density or low medium density sort of development if the townhouses are just a little higher. I think the effect is already there. Anyway, I don't have a big problem with that. But I will be actually, when we get to the vote here, moving for separation not only 1 and 2, but from A, B, C, D, E, and F. When we get to the vote.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Asmussen.
I had the same concern as Councillor Marsden in terms of the height of potential height of townhouses. So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is when they come for a development permit, that's the point where we can say that's too high. Is that what you were saying?
Well, no, depending on how the ultimate zoning bylaw amendments are worded, but no, if you permit 3 stories, then you know that's the design height. So now how's that, given the adjacency, how's that being dealt with? You know, in terms of the siting and the design of the buildings, I mean, the articulation, landscaping, it just gives you that extra ability to deal with that part of it.
And if a builder wants 10-foot ceilings on the main floor and 9-foot ceilings on the second floor and a nice peaked roof, we just let them do that?
We could look at that in terms of it was a maximum. It's doubtful that it would go into that sort of cost of construction. That's more of a high-end type of construction approach.
Oh, we saw that on one of the housing choices buildings on Miller. 10-foot ceilings on the main floor, 9-foot or 8-foot at least on the second floor. But they were only 2 levels.
Yeah.
So I just feel very uncomfortable us approving something like this and having a 13-meter tall townhouse potentially. Now I know maybe it's unrealistic, but lots of things that we don't anticipate end up happening.
Through the chair, we always have the option of adding a meter height limit instead of stories. Stories is just a flexible way to calculate height for the developer and for the city to evaluate the product, but we can maintain the 11-meter height that the RTM1 currently permits. The product we have seen does end up being 3 stories, usually with a flat roof, but we can maintain that height restriction. Also, if council is uncomfortable with raising the height, you can maintain the current height restrictions in both zones. We were just looking to add added flexibility because of the request for additional parking spaces for the townhouse units.
So maybe help me visualize it then, and this kind of goes towards what Councillor O'Neill was saying of trying to walk us through this. So if I have an 8-foot ceiling in the garage on the main floor and then a 9-foot ceiling on the main living area, and then an 8-foot ceiling on the bedroom area on the top floor, and a typical peaked roof, how tall would that be? Like, I have no idea if that's more than 11 meters or 12 meters right now.
That would be over 11 meters, but would be defined as 3 stories.
8 feet, 9 feet, 8 feet, and a peaked roof. You say it's over.
Oh, no, 10 feet. Sorry, I misheard. That would be 11 meters, depending on how high the peak is.
So you don't have to go necessarily a flatter style roof if you only go 8, 9, and 8.
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay. The other question I had was the cities that do try to enforce using parking spots for actual parking. You said that they had difficult time with that. Did we learn anything from that, or can we look beyond the Metro Vancouver area for other areas that might actually have some ideas or tips on I don't know.
Through the chair, we were highly considering putting in an amendment like that into the zoning bylaw, But with all our analysis, it does ultimately come down to enforcement, and it would require bylaw officers to investigate how garages are being utilized by residents, and it would be a very difficult approach.
Okay. When we talk about townhouse developments and 2 spots per unit, would it be? I mean, I hate putting something in sort of legislation now with the way society may evolve over time. And so if we say we need 2 spots per townhouse, but, you know, a developer could say, well, I'm just going to build 1 spot and then we'll have a parking area for a number of cars outside. 15 years from now, much better transit, people riding bikes more, people using transit more, not using cars as much. Would we ever entertain a developer coming to us and say, okay, these parking spots are not being used, can we build a 4-unit townhouse in this empty parking space? So at some point the land could get used for best use, but in the meantime, when we don't have proper transit and society isn't at that point yet, we provide enough parking spots. Obviously, you know, a fairly large townhouse development to warrant that many outdoor parking spots, but
Through the chair, I guess anything's possible in the fullness of time. The developer likely would not be around. It would be they develop the site.
The strata.
The strata. But then you're into sort of the intricacies of the strata. If it's limited common property, they have certain controls and constraints on how they can deal with that property and dispose of it, I guess, because basically they'd be converting it from open or common property to assigned units. Maybe possible at some point in the future. It's you just have to cross that bridge when it came to it.
Seems like it could be a fairly valuable asset for the strata if there was that development potential.
My experience with stratas is once things are sort of enshrined, same way with our park system, like once that open space is there, or that parking is there, the stratas tend to be pretty possessive about that, you know, keeping it in that way, because people come become accustomed to that and to enjoy it, and having more neighbors may not be their preference. But again, it would be open at a future point in time if the strata was to come forward to the council today saying we'd like to apply to amend the development permit for this property. Here's what we're allowed to do. We're short of the density. We got extra area here. Can we include some additional units on our complex?
Good. And then I just would love to see a little bit more about trying to make storage space more ingrained in some of these. So storage in the, you know, we have this garage right here, right? Storage in the attic of the garage. I talked to a developer and they said, you know, in some of these areas where the garages are built on hills, they got to dig so deep for the footing that it would actually only cost, you know, maybe $5,000-$6,000 more to actually have a basement in these garages for storage, right? And so I know it's every lot is different, and you don't want to, you know, have everybody having to put basements in the garages. But I mean, I just would love us to be a little bit more creative in terms of trying to include storage so that the garages actually are used for parking cars. So.
Thank you. Councillor Zarella has not spoken yet, and then I have Councillor Asmus and then Councillor Zarella. Sorry.
Thank you. I like the increases in the standards for the townhousing going. I've been speaking to that for a little while now. Going back to May's issue, we've talked about a long time that with the cost of detached single-family housing, a lot of teenagers and people are going to be growing up within townhousing, and you're going to need that extra spot because it won't be as we used to be where young families be in townhousing, where the kids are young. By the time their kids were getting the teenager, they'd be moving into a detached home and having that extra parking ability. So I really think that we need to have those 2 spaces per unit. My son lived in a townhouse development where they had 1 unit, but a parking area off the side, further away from his units. The people that were close to that used a lot of the parking spaces. The people that were further away from it was a real pain. If you're coming home, you've got groceries, you're doing something, you're in that spot that's far away. So it became a real conflict within the development. It didn't get well used, and I just think if you're going to have 2 spaces, you should have 2 spaces per unit in there. I'm not so much concerned about the cost. When you look at a lot of the Scanlon municipalities, a lot of municipalities already are requiring 2 units. We're probably at, I think Master McIntyre said before, we're at the lower end of all the cities on parking spaces within the townhouses or area. So I think that's a benefit. I think developers can adjust to it and still get out the same product. I think May said before that you may have, rather than having 22 units, you may have 20 or 21 units, but you'll still be able to, you'll provide a better area for the community. I'm not supportive of tandem parking, and I think we're taking it out in these zones. I'm not supportive of counting tandem parking in a townhouse development. I think when we looked at the Riley issue, and we had the Riley land beside it, and the people came out, a lot of those people were complaining about that, yeah, we have tandem parking, but nobody uses it, and everybody's parking on the street, and it's a huge problem, and we've got some other developments on the mountain that are like that, where, just not off Riley, there's another one down where that curb is there on, I think, it's on Highland or Queenston there, they're all parking out in the street, and because there's a tandem, and those tandems in townhouses do not work. When you count that first space, you can't count that as a second parking space because they're just going to push cars all over the street. You're going to have troubles on the street. So I do not want to see tandem parking counted in townhousing. I like the idea of looking at something in a bylaw, coming out with Councillor Hodge pointed out, in a bylaw where it may be difficult to enforce. I think there has to be a bit of a threat or something coming out to the public saying, look, you got to use your garages. I think part of a parking problem, that's just not on Burke Mountain, throughout the city. We've had people come to this, we've had public hearings, and the guy said, well, I could support this development, but there's no parking on the street. If everybody on my street put 1 car in their garage, we wouldn't have a problem. We could support this. I mean, this is throughout Coquitlam. A lot of places people aren't using the garages. We had a public hearing on Duchess with a townhouse rather than a single family, a duplex rather than a single family. And I drove that every morning. I could go out there in the morning. All those people are parking 2 cars on their driveway apron and their garage. And I said to the guy, if you parked a car in the garage, you wouldn't have any parking problems on the street. He said, well, I guess we could put 1 in the garage. It would solve our parking problems. I think there needs to be some sort of incentive or something being said that you have to use your garage for parking. It may be difficult to enforce, but I think it really impacts the neighborhoods in these areas with all these cars throughout the street. You can get into conflicts with people, and Craig and I can talk about fights and different things that policemen call over these issues. And I think I'd like to find a way to get at that. The townhousing sites, I think it's only half a story because you're at 2.5 allowed already, so you're going to go to 3, so it's really only an increase of a half a story in height. I think, as you said, we could limit it to 11 meters, keep it at that height by allowing, they could then go to flatter roof on the designs. But I still think we should allow, I think the calculation makes sense going to 3 stories, but keeping an 11-meter height on it. And once again, they can come for a variance like they do if they need to go above that height. But I think, once again, as Councillor O'Neill said, is that when you're looking at a 20, 30, or 60-unit townhouse development, it's a massing of a site to people around it anyways, but once it's there, all the heights are pretty much the same. It blends into everything. It's not really where you have small house, big house, small house, that you really start to see that height and massing as much on this. So I think it creates more flexibility for the people designing row houses, townhouses, to achieve that 2 parking spaces. So I think we can have it both ways, putting the 11-meter in there, but it's going to stories, so it's more consistent for our developers to understand, and we get the same consistency between zones, as I think Mr. Dollywall was saying. So that I like. I think the RT3 parking amendment, going to 2 spaces, I want us to look at that, but once again have flexibility on that, because once again, we were talking before, we had some on Miller, we have I think 3 or 4, and I think if you start getting more than those things, I think to May's point, they all count the same number of street parking. If you start getting too many of those triplex, fourplexes on each lot down there, and you're only doing 1.5, you're overloading the area. So I would, in that case, while it may make them more difficult, rather than 4, they may have to go to 3 units rather than 2 on a light. But if we get the proper parking in there, it'll save the neighborhood better. So I like that part about looking at that and getting that brought in. On the other page, on your back page, I'll defer when there's Stewart Parks, but I do want to get into this minimum garage size because a bunch of people complained about the narrowness of garages, not being able to use them, to get a proper minimum size and standardize that. So people are making these, we've seen them up there, some of these really two-car garages, but you can only get two small cars in them. You can't get some SUVs side by side in there. People have them. So I want to get some standardizing within that. And what's the other one here? I review the building setbacks. I'd like to see that for flexibility in developing larger garage, additional storage, and once again, I would like to see storage within the garages where it's possible, whether it's in the attic, because people in these houses, they're designed today with limited storage, are all about livable space, and my worry is that if you make any extra space inside a house, people are turn it into habitable space, not storage space. So putting in the attic of a garage like that, or it would like a crawl space type of basement that Councillor Wilson's talking about, I think that's another good idea that should be considered, because I do think that's one of the issues, trying to get people other areas. I think Craig brought that up about a month or so ago on that, so I'll be in support of that idea. And yeah, that's my comments for now, but I think it's a good report. I can support the direction in this and all units moving forward here. I do know there's some, as Councillor Neal, I noticed the same things about the shoulder and the core. But I also want to know, when you talk about reducing parking standards, in the core we talked about going in the core of a development down to 1.35. But outside the shoulder and that was still 1.5. And so you're only talking about in the core, right in the transit area where we were going to allow that, or was it allowed in the shoulder also?
Through the chair, the TDM parking reductions are in the core and shoulder, up to 800 meters from a station.
But there's more, I think when we look in the core, we're more into that. When you get outside the core, in the shoulder, there's more of a analysis of the existing areas and what you're into the neighborhoods beside it, I would hope, in that area. But once you get past that area, you're still that's only within those transit-oriented core and shoulder areas. And we have round two.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Yeah. So, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Zerillo and then Councillor Towner.
Well, I want to thank Mr. Dollywell for taking this on. Part of this report is great. Just have one concern, really, and my concern lies in the attempt to maybe widen the scope of the project. Again, it kind of reminds me of the liquor manufacturing bylaw when it came forward to address one issue, and we potentially incorporated some other housekeeping items that made it complicated, and we had to start again. So what I'm talking about is point 2, bullets C and D, where we're potentially impacting the heights of row houses and townhouses, and this could be an issue and impacting view corridors. So if this comes for first reading, I would ask that these heights changes are called out. I think that, if a resident looks at this and it says it's a parking review, they would be very surprised to see that we would finish by changing the heights of townhouses from row houses. So Councillor O'Neill said that he's going to ask for separation. I think that's good. My personal request would be that this would not be involved in this public hearing, section 2 C and D, because it's a totally different animal. That being said, I do understand why it's here. If developers are going to lose floor space because they have to do a 20-foot frontage, I'm sure that they will try to recoup some of those losses by having 11-foot, 9-foot, even 12-foot ceilings on as many levels as they can. So I totally understand why it would be here, but I just think we need to call it out. Carports, no garages, enclosed versus non-enclosed. I've said it many times. I think carports are awesome. If we are really trying to affect affordability, why not? So I wasn't going to mention it, but thank you to Councillor O'Neill. There's some wonderful townhouse developments in older Coquitlam where it's carports, and it works great, and it's a little more affordable. But yeah, I wouldn't want to see this fall apart because we're trying to throw in the height changes without calling it out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Towner, and then I have Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. I'm really glad this is being looked at. There's some fabulous ideas here, and there's been some great, very creative ideas expressed today. I just want to chime in. I'm not going to repeat where my interests have already been spoken for, but I actually viewed the increase in height as a positive thing, because we keep hearing over and over and over again that it's lack of storage, people are using their garages and then parking outside. So I'm thinking if there's more space within the actual dwelling, then people will use their garages. And a lot of the uproar we hear about some of these so-called monster houses, I think it's because they're in between smaller, older homes. So if it's townhousing and row homes and they're all a bit higher together, that's maybe worth further discussion, but I don't have a concern with that because it gives more space inside the unit. Excellent. I really appreciated all of the gathering, comparing for the municipalities, the municipal scan. I think that's fabulous. I'm curious, though, I don't think we could enforce people using their garages, but I've heard from many neighbors up on Burke Mountain where they say they have a tenant and they have a pad for that secondary suite parking, but then the homeowner parks their boat or their RV or something there and says, oh, the tenant parks on the street. Is there any way we could enforce that kind of secondary suite parking where it's visible, there's a pad there and there's a boat on it or an RV, and they have a suite? Is there, I don't want to become nanny state, but would it be easier to enforce that rather than the garage?
Through the chair, we are reviewing RV and boat parking as a separate issue this year, and there will be a report coming forward in the fall to discuss that aspect. As for enforcement of the secondary suite parking pad, it's similar to storage in garages. You would be going out and looking for the problem or reacting to complaint basis, but then it becomes a use issue.
Okay, thanks. And I also just wanted to say that on the other parking issues to consider, my least favorite of these is the restrict where secondary suites are permitted. I think that the potential impacts with affordable housing, and I think the main thing there would be to enforce if you have a tenant, they have to have a street, an off-street parking. So I just wanted to voice that. And again, somebody spoke to it. I think making it the new normal with these new row home or townhome developments, that there's an expectation to use your garage for your vehicles. I brought that up with the Falcon development, with the strata maybe. Let people know ahead of time that you are expected to use your garage. I don't know how we can do that, but I think it just has to be sort of out there. You're buying here. You can't fill your garage up with your stuff. What can we do? I think there's some great ideas here, so thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Stewart.
A few comments related to the townhouse. I mean, the two-car parking requirement doesn't necessarily move into a 20-foot townhouse. I've seen lots of successful 16s and 17s on two, as long as one's an outside carport with a zero lot line, a relaxation essentially of the parking overlap between the driveway and the single car garage, and then you have 6 feet left for the upstairs stairs and the downstairs corridor. So I don't know that that's necessarily as much of an impediment, and certainly there's the off-site or off the somewhat 100 feet away parking spots that will work. But I will say that I think we're going to have to get closer to requiring shorter, lower ceilings on some of our more modest housing forms. When we permit a 9 or a 10 in a townhouse, we end up with a building bulk that is troublesome to many neighbors, and we see that certainly on the housing choices stuff, where we suddenly the roof line is at 20 feet above grade instead of 17 feet above grade, and it really does change the look. The only reason the builder's doing that is so that he can make it a luxury home instead of a more modest family kind of home. It doesn't have any positive effect on affordability, it has a negative effect on affordability, and it has a negative effect on the approval of, or the acceptance in neighborhoods of that housing form when we're starting to put more building bulk, because after all, the public's only concerned about above-grade bulk. They don't care how many stories there are. They only care how big the thing looks from the street. So I would try to get us to contemplate, if we're going to go to 3 stories, that they're 8 feet, that they're essentially 26 feet from basement slab to underside of ceiling on the 3rd floor, and full stop. Then you guys can pack in a 4th story if you can make them 6s. I'm being facetious. On the last comment, though, we're probably going to have to move, I think, to a business license for rental. When you're renting out a suite, you take out the $400 business license, and you must qualify for the license. That is, you must meet the conditions, which includes, I don't care where you park your boat, but your tenant parks there, because that's your tenant's parking space. Your tenant gets to use your garbage can. You don't make the tenant drive the garbage twice a week into the park and park it and stuff into the park garbage can, like we see so many places. We're going to have to be more stringent with the way in which we treat rentals, and the way in which we certainly address the private hotels in single-family neighborhoods, because we have them. We have hotels in apartment buildings because we have landlords using Airbnb. So, but that's on a different topic entirely. So I think there's creative ways, if we get past the absolute width of the parking space, that we allow a parking space to overlap onto a driveway, such that you can end up with doors not conflicting, and they'll make it work. We've there's some of the photos here. That's 2 parking spaces if the tenants can get along. And sometimes you'll see one parked closer to the back and one parked closer to the front, so the doors don't conflict. And we're going to have to do that, because land is no longer $50 a foot. So.
Thank you. Okay. You want to get down? Okay. No, I've got a second list going here, so I'll put you down here. Okay. So I have myself down. On the ICBC stats, it is an average, but in some neighborhoods, I can tell you, there's obviously more than 2 cars per family over an entire neighborhood, and Burke Mountain is one of them. I think that when it comes to Burke, what I've seen up there is where the parking challenges occur, it's where they're in the general area of a multifamily. So such as Marguerite, such as Riley. I think we finally hit it right on the single-family homes, particularly now that we've widened the street back out to allow parking on both sides. I think we're pretty good there. What I would hate to see is that we know that there's a lot of people up on Burke and some of the new areas that they're putting in suites. The homes are being built to accommodate suites, which is fine because they're built to the proper standards, and as long as they provide the parking, everything is good. But in order to provide they would have to have 3 spots per house. If they had a suite, they'd have to have 2 spots plus the 3rd spot. There's no way you're going to get a 3-width driveway. So by nature of the fact that if there's 2 in the garage and 1 on the driveway, is that one on the driveway now counted as a tandem spot by definition?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
See, and so that doesn't work on a single family, because you would not have a single suite anywhere on Burke Mountain. We know that's not going to fly. And then what we're going to do is see a whole lot of illegal suites, and they're not going to comply with everything else. So to me, the issue around allowing for where you have a carriage home or where you have that single suite, that extra suite, I think you can allow tandem as your 3rd spot, because 2 people, the owner of the house can park and coordinate back and forth. The renter has to have a spot that's free and clear off of the street. And I think that's what we really need to ensure, whether it's through a business license, and maybe that's where we enforce the use of garages. Because you may not be able to go in and say one has to park your car in your garage, but maybe as a condition of having a license to have a secondary suite, that's where you put that as the condition of having that suite, is that you have to provide parking in your garage. not just everything that was in your basement before you built the basement suite is now moved up to the garage, which is sort of creates that double whammy. There's no space in your basement, so it's all in your garage. Now there's nowhere to park in your garage, so both of your cars and your tenants are all out in the driveway in the street. So I think it's workable on the single family. In the multifamily, I think you have to have 2 spots per residency. And I say that because we see more and more people moving into multifamily. The people who were once, your single-family homeowners or single residential, they're not there anymore. They're raising their kids in multifamily. They've got both parents working. They've got the soccer balls and all the stuff in the garage. So multifamilies are becoming the old style of single-family, and I think they have to have 2 spots. I don't necessarily think that they have to be together. Tandem doesn't work. I had a chance to talk to somebody who lives in the Riley, and he spent $10,000 to buy a surface spot right across from his unit, because he didn't want to put 2 cars in there. Obviously he had the money, and he preferred to buy the outside spot. So I don't think tandem works on the multifamily, particularly when you've only got 2 spots and one of them's tandem. And that's where I made the differentiated earlier was tandem might work as the 3rd spot, but when you've only prescribed 2, they've got to be 2 clear spots.
If I could, Mr. Chair, just on that, there's been a lot of discussion and some really helpful feedback this afternoon through the council comments. Just very briefly on the tandem, and perhaps Councillor Reid will recall this, that the time I've been with the Coquitlam now, it's gone through a whole cycle. When I came here, tandem parking was not permitted for secondary suites, and so a lot of secondary suites stumbled on that. They couldn't provide enough parking on site because it couldn't be in a tandem form. A number of years later, I think we revisited that, and I think and also with the push towards housing affordability, housing options, we moved off that. I think there was some that had concerns around that. So we've been in this period for 6-7 years, maybe, allowing for tandem parking for secondary suites. I think what we're hearing is that is now proving to be problematic. Time and time again we hear stories, and particularly if there's smaller houses or large houses, small garages. There's a lot of stuff in the garage. The owners have 2 vehicles. They want to be on the driveway, and they're forcing their tenant onto the street. So one of the things we've looked at, I'll let Michael speak to this in a second because it gets into more of the details of the lot widths and layouts and setbacks, but is that ability to still enable, because I take Councillor Towner's point about if we prohibit secondary suites in some of the small lot single family zones, they'll be there regardless. So is there a way to enable them, but to get away from that tandem parking challenge? Because I think it will continue to be problematic. So, Michael, just on that, was that one of the follow-ups in looking at some of the RS7 lots? How you could have the two parking stalls plus a separate stall for a secondary suite?
Through the chair, so our analysis shows on narrow lots, so the RT1 and RS7 lots, you are still able to get 3 parking stalls. It does create, you don't need to necessarily widen the apron property line to property line. What we're trying to avoid is having that 3rd stall right in front of the garage door. So if it's off to the side of the garage, or as the mayor pointed out, maybe a little bit onto the apron, that's the kind of options we're looking at to provide the 3 spaces, and we're trying to avoid a situation where the 3rd space is directly in front of a double-car garage.
Right. Now here, this is the one that's up here. That's, I'm suspecting, it might be an RS7, and certainly it's rear load. So you can do it rear load because you've got the garage and you've got 2 spots side by side. It works. But if you go to the next street over, which is RS8s, they're on 40-foot lots, no lane. So you're saying you can't have a basement suite unless you got a 3-car driveway. And so the streetscape, I don't mind parking right across the back, but I'd hate to see that at the front.
Through the chair, yes. In front-loaded lots, that was one of our concerns, where you would have a lot more asphalt in the front and parking spaces. But to accommodate 3 parking spaces without a tandem situation, this would be the only approach.
Right. But, I mean, I grew up in the old part of Coquitlam. We had a garage. We parked in the driveway. That's for years. And even if you had 2 or 3 people without the basement suite, people park in their driveways. I think the biggest challenge we have is that people are parking in their driveways and not using their garage as well. And that's where I'm thinking in the case of the secondary suites, we can say you have to put that 3rd car. You can't, if we allow the driveway as being the tandem spot, the concept is one of the cars is in the garage. You can't use that as your storage space because you built out your full basement. You didn't leave a place to store your Christmas decorations and your golf clubs.
And that's correct, Mr. Chairman. And if you want to take the leap of getting into a business licensing system for secondary suites, we can discuss that with bylaw enforcement. It would give you that mechanism to have that sort of additional level of scrutiny and control. But with that, there'd be some resource demands for that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's always complaint driven. But you could say so-and-so's tenant is parking on the street. You can go back and say, well, where's your parking spots? If it's only 2 on the apron and none in the garage, then you're creating the problem.
Mr. Chair, there's been a number of comments around the council table this afternoon. We'll take that back. We'll chat with the staff in that area, and the next report you see will have some discussion around that point.
Okay. I think we've got that. I'm glad 2 other councillors have raised the thing about the storage in the attic. That's something I raised a few months ago. I think that we talk about height. We've had a big discussion about 2.5 versus 3-story on the multifamily. I would be quite okay at the back of the house seeing that garage, a meter higher, and having a storage loft in there. And apparently this was done somewhere up on the plateau. A developer was going to give me the name, but there's a group that they did this up on the plateau where they actually built storage up into the attics of the garages. I don't know if they have the drop down stairs, but I've seen that where the stair pulls down, you can walk up. It's not high enough you can put a suite in, but it's high enough you can actually get the stuff and move it around, and it's up in the attic. So I really want us to look at that as a way of encouraging more use of the garages. And as I said, we're looking up in Burke Mountain, even where there's secondary suites. I'm not seeing the problem up in the residential now that we've offered the parking on both sides. But it spills out from the townhouses, and that I think we have to have 2 spots in there and I think that will eliminate the problem on the street. Okay, next I have May, then, Councillor Reid, and then I have Councillor O'Neill and Councillor Asmussen.
Okay, well, I am not building streets and roadways to accommodate people who have tenants and use up our visitor parking spots. That's what it's for. It's not for the tenants to park there. Now, years ago, as you said, we did have a proviso. Years ago, we brought in where you had to have it off the main driveway, and that's still it. And if you can't do it, then you don't have a suite. And that's what we have to start looking at. Mayor Stewart, I think your idea of having licenses for suites is absolutely excellent. I think it could solve a lot of our problems. I just forgot to mention when Councillor O'Neill brought up the car share and that the cash in lieu payments. I mean, it might do something for us. It sure does nothing for the neighborhood. What does that do? I mean, it just doesn't do anything for the neighborhood. My problem here is trying to be neighborhood friendly, and that's what we need. We need ways to deal with neighborhoods. So I go to the signage, which wasn't addressed here, and I don't know, I didn't see that it's going to be addressed somewhere else, but like no overnight parking, in some neighborhoods. That works in Vancouver quite a bit. And the other thing, when people are talking about carports, and I think I will send council a few addresses to go drive by. One in particular, in one of our neighbors' cities, I drove in to look at a place with someone one night. We drove in, and the fence, the property line was right here, and you drove in, and there were all little carports. Unfortunately, if you're driving in a Toyota Tiny, you can get in and out. If you're driving in a Cadillac or a Lincoln once you get in that carport, you're not getting out. It's you back right up. You can feel it. You go forward. You inch your way out. The client was in a truck and he had to back 20 units down to get out onto the road. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that the road widths have to be big enough to allow turnaround when we get to property lines. And please do that, because we have one in Coquitlam that isn't very good, but for the most part we've got developers that recognize that. I think we have a long way to go here. I guess my biggest thing is if you're going to have a suite, then you have to have the parking, and that's not on the driveway behind an owner. But it's been that way for years. And I think the business licensing is great. And I think we really have to look at signage.
Next I have Councillor O'Neill and then Councillor Asmundson.
Thank you. Okay, I've got 5 different points I want to raise. One, is it safe to assume that if all of this were to go ahead, or some part of it, let's say the F, 2F, no more tandem parking for secondary suites, would existing tandem parking for existing secondary suites be grandfathered? Or was this thought to be retroactive? I would suggest that better be grandfathered. We're going to have huge problems. But what was your thoughts on it? What were your thoughts?
Through the chair, that is correct. They would be grandfathered.
Okay, good. Thank you. And quickly, the cash in lieu to get your parking down below 1.35 in a transit hub, is money to go to a potential parking lot in the area. So it would eventually help the neighborhood. At this stage, it doesn't help the neighborhood at all. But that was the thought, that if there was some cash in lieu to get below 1.35, it would be a parking lot fund. And speaking of parking lots, when one normally thinks of either Coquitlam or town center, I think a lot of what we're doing here today is reacting to problems on Burke Mountain. And a lot of those problems were because previous councils thought we don't need a lot of parking there because that's going to be a transit-oriented neighborhood, right? Okay, so it's not a transit-oriented neighborhood. We know that. It's never going to be. TransLink's changed their criteria for, we're not even going to get frequent transit network status up there. You need to have, we thought we could get, if we had a really concentrated hub of people there and a concentrated hub here, we can get frequent transit between the two. No, we can't. There has to be stuff in between. So we're not going to get that. However, we do have a frequent transit network in other parts of Coquitlam, and we do have pretty good bus service, everything like that. So if we were to bring in these bylaws changes, it seems to me that they would be most needed on Burke Mountain, but they wouldn't be as needed in other parts of Coquitlam because there actually is transit-oriented development going on, even outside of the hubs. So you're close to good bus service. You're close to the B lines and things like that. Has there been any thought, consideration, analysis done on where the sort of change is actually needed, and if and where it would be most impactful and where it would be redundant?
Through the chair, I do recall through earlier discussions and receiving feedback from council. I know that the initial impetus was looking at the Northeast and some of the ongoing issues there, but my recollection is as we got further into it and as other projects came forward, like certainly the housing choices, there was some concerns around that. I think the indication of staff was not just to be Burke Mountain centric, but to look citywide. Though it is true, obviously, in some areas in the Southwest there is better bus service, but I think around the housing choices, because we run into some of these are pretty tight sites, and just getting enough parking on site, there seemed to be an interest to explore that. So at the end of the day, we're here at council's direction. I'm sensing council wants some flexibility in how this bylaw or bylaws is packaged, so you can kind of a pick list, pick choice, at the end of the day, so it doesn't get held up. But at this point, we're thinking by housing type and citywide. So, Michael, is there anything further on that you wanted to speak to?
So is my last question, I think, has to do with 2A again. 2A, by the way, we're going to have to amend that to more accurately reflect that row housing is going from 1 to 2. We've got to vote on that specifically. But is there anything in that that would preclude the developer from providing 2 spaces in tandem? All the discussion seems to me has gone around that these are going to be side-by-side spaces, but could a developer provide that in tandem?
Through the chair, the zoning bylaw currently does not recognize the second space in a tandem configuration for multifamily units. The developer could provide the 2 spaces in tandem, but would then be required to provide an additional space somewhere else to be compliant with the zoning bylaw.
So clarify, let's say one of my sons lives in a development on Haines Crescent, Brook Mountain, just above Galloway Park, and they've got tandem space. So that our zoning bylaw just says that's 1 space. That only, and the developer sold it as 2, but we just call it 1.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, I actually hadn't realized this till this discussion here today. So that's another reason why I thought maybe should have walked through this a little better to find out those sorts of things. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Asmundson and then Councillor Marston.
Well, just from my point of view, when I look at the concrete here, I thought that was not allowed because, especially Burke-Round areas, the reason for gravel was because of groundwater infiltration in there, and I thought that was one of the reasons, and that none of them were paved over. I know because there's between each house on Burke Mountain, there's gravel in between as acting as a swale and for water retention. So that was my reasoning on that. That was.
Yeah, through the chair, I was thinking it was the opposite. I made a note to self, why is there still gravel on some of those parking pads? But I'm going to check with staff on that, unless Michael, unless you know it right offhand. But my understanding was that the parking was supposed to be in a paved condition. There's other measures that are incorporated into these lots to deal with the rainwater runoff and diverting that to ground. But we'll check on that.
Well, if that's not the case, then I would argue that we shouldn't have gravel on any of these parking pads, that they shall be paved. It was on my understanding that the only reason they were gravel, and I mean, it's cheaper for the developer to do it, but it's a mess in the neighborhoods. So for people, when it gets dusty, and it's just a pain. So we can find out the answer to that one there. I will say this, in my areas and talking to people, and a lot of people that have suites park on the street because it's easier access to the entry point of their unit. They don't want to park in the pad in the back. And so that's what you're finding a lot of the people or tenants are doing, is they're parking on the street just because the access is easier. And sometimes my daughter has a tenant. There's a pad at the back they park, and they never park in. They always park on the street right in front of the house, walk in because it's on the side door closer to the front of the house. So that's one of the reasons. So if we look at suites, maybe you have to move the door further, access point further back, and it may get greater use. But that's so that's one part. I think regardless of single family and secondary suites, you have to have 3 sites off the road, whether it's a sought onto the side of the front and the front loaded, or at the back, wherever you have to have. I don't want to use, as May said, the street, which is for visitor and other type of parking, being used as that suite parking. So that's the, I like the idea of a license. I know we'd have to find out what the operational cost to that would be, but it may be a better way of dealing with suites. Parking's a problem throughout this area in the whole city. It's just not on Burke Mountain. We've had people from all over the cities, Coquitlam, Millardville, all over the place about parking and the parking problems in their area. parts of Old Coquitlam have good bus service. I've said before, the good bus service hasn't resulted in reduced parking problems in those areas. There's still parking problems even with good bus service. Even if we put frequent service up on Burke Mountain at 15-minute service, you'd still have parking problems on Mount. It will reduce congestion of people driving all the time. They're still going to have vehicles. They're still going to be parking in the area. They may not be using them all the time, but they will, until you can get a mode share or a car share in that area, they may reduce ownership. But until those areas that are further out from those areas, you have parking problems. I don't think there's been a public hearing for any major development. We just looked at a couple of ones in Millardville, a bunch of them in Millardville recently, all about parking on the street where they have good transit. So these changes, I think, are necessary to move forward. I think there's some corrections that need to be made here, but I do agree with the intent of what we need to go through here and to get our parking on. I think the sooner we get these through and done, it will help us, the development community, because I think council's talked about now Tandem, some others want to go to what Stafford dealt with. We're encouraging you to do that, but there is no regulation in place. So I'd like to see this come back as quickly as possible and get this dealt with so we have clarity and the development community and our residents have clarity on our standards moving forward. And everybody wins, I hope, in the end of the day with this. Thank you.
Okay, and last I have Councillor Marsden.
Thanks. I think we've gone around on this. We've had a couple comments that add pieces that weren't proposed here, and so I want to make sure that we're keeping those separate. So any discussion about business licensing and rentals and that, I hope, is separate and future dated dialogue as opposed to slowing the process, because I agree with what Councillor Asmundson has just said. We do need to move forward. We recognize that. We've heard it from the community. We do need to move forward, and I wouldn't want to slow the process as we try to figure out how to implement the business licensing component, because I think it does have, well, I appreciate you made the comment, but others have suggested we go in that direction. I want to make sure that we're not slowing it to do that. That wasn't the intent, perhaps. I want to make sure that wasn't what staff had heard. So all that to lead to the question, are we clear that we want to deal with what we've got before us and not any of the other side conversations, correct?
McIntyre.
If I could, Mr. Chair, just do be clear on this point, because we've heard a number of points of view around the table on this. My sense would be we'll want to go back, we'll want to talk to the staff in that area. That would ultimately be the responsibility. Get some initial commentary and provide that information back to council. Certainly our focus will be on bringing this package forward ASAP in a form that allows you to pick and choose. And but if there's other things been raised today, we want to attend to that as well. We're not going to come back with a full-blown program for you, but we're going to give you a little bit more information in that regard.
Perfect, thank you. Because I think what we've got here enables us to move forward. If this is probably something we're going to have to tweak on an ongoing basis. Councillor O'Neill has just said that this is a Burke Mountain issue, and it's not. With all due respect, I disagree with that, because I think it is across the city as we see more and more redevelopment of our older areas on the southwest. These parking challenges are going to rise up. So I think we need to move forward with this, and I appreciate the work you've done so far. And let's get some bylaw revision on the books and then move forward from here. Thank you.
Okay, I got Pete, and then I've got Councillor Tanner.
Maybe all
Mr.
Councillor, I was going to do some wrap-up suggestions, but maybe
I'm going to let Councillor Towner speak, and then we'll go to Mr. Steblin. Okay.
Mine's just a quick question. Quality of living, designing developments, neighborliness, all that stuff, very, very important. But a big concern for me is also housing affordability. So I'm really curious. Somebody spoke to it earlier. I'd love to see, is it possible even to see what a townhouse or row home unit would be priced at currently compared to, we have to balance all this regulation with housing affordability, and that's just one concern that jumped out at me when I was reading all of this.
Just real quickly, that caught my attention too, and I was thinking back to some of the stuff we did around the CACs and what that means, incremental cost-wise. We'll take that away. We'll see if we can't come up with some general yardsticks in terms of what the price or cost implications might be.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Mr. Steblin.
I wasn't sure if it's 100.
Councilor,
No,
do you have
that's
something? We have two choices here. We're going to have to report back in this forum again. And we have two choices here: either go through to A, B, C to give initial impressions, but there's many other issues that have been raised as well that you're also going to have to give us questions. An alternative approach would be simply to bring them all back at the same time and have a series of questions similar to some other things that we've done, and then we'll be clear before we go to public hearing. Or you could give some interim direction on these here. My suggestion would be just take it all away, bring back another report, series of questions, and then have another session like
Go
this.
through the A, B, yeah.
So I do that.
Time frame.
As soon as we can. And I'll dictate my observations tomorrow morning. And it's how Michael's got a lot on his plate, though. And so
Try to get it.
things take some time.
But we have faith.
He's still smiling.
Let us down.
We only get what they say.
And I can say this issue was not as important as one other issue. But hopefully the other issue will be dealt with relatively quickly.
Okay.
So
Okay.
this is on the top priority.
About 2 months.
Thanks.
These are that.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Councillor Sorrell.
So there's a move. Is there a second, or where are we at?
Move the sentence
I
back.
moved it to,
Or just number one?
No, the whole package.
The whole package to staff.
move to staff for further.
So that's essentially just number one, information and feedback.
Yes.
Yes.
Receive
Okay,
information, just
move
number
one.
Yeah.
Number one.
Moved by Councillor Reid, seconded by Councillor Asmundson. All in favor? Any opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you.
Oh, hang on.
Oh.
We're only doing number. Like I want to come to number 2.
But we're not.
Okay, well,
Well, I thought number one
you can then move
seated.
it, and if nobody seconds it, we can't talk about it. We just agreed just to number one.
Just to do numbers, either 1 or 2.
We were just going to refer it all
The
back.
whole thing is going
And I
as a
just
package.
I wanted to mention that 2, C, and D have nothing to do with parking, and that it's just going to confuse it when it comes back. If we're going to try to make this big.
We will have
Bylaw again.
we'll have discrete questions, and you can clearly at that time say yes or no.
Yeah, I don't
But
like that process.
if there's another process, please direct us to do that. A motion, like the motion that I got, or the direction I got out of this, was to bring it back with a series of questions. If council wants us to do something different, please tell us now.
No, I'm good.
You have to deal with the
So I'm
height
going
because
to
of the
move
parking.
that we ask staff not to come back in this bylaw or this request to go to first reading with numbers 2C and 2D, which relate to the height of townhouses and RTM1 and RT2 zones, because I don't feel that it's a parking related issue.
Okay. Yes, Director
So
Gordon.
we can note this as a staff direction for them to come back.
But she's
To be
making a
clear.
separate motion. Is there a seconder to that motion?
Sorry, to discuss it.
To be clear, the request was that staff not come back with a first reading bylaw that includes C and D.
C and D, yeah, because
Staff-
it's not related to parking.
Staff aren't coming back with a first reading bylaw.
Okay,
We instructed-
sorry, so can we, when staff brings back an amendment bylaw recommending first reading in consultation with the Development Industry Neighboring Association, other affected parties on the following zoning bylaw amendment, that we exclude C and D as they do not relate to parking?
Your motion should be not related to the report back on the bylaw, because there's going to be an interim report. Right. A series of questions. So your motion should be drop those 2 questions from the list of questions that are to be referred back.
Okay, so
That's what
that, the motion is to drop those 2 questions when it comes back.
Is there a seconder to
Is
that
there a
motion?
second?
No, because
Thank
they
you.
relate to parking.
Well, I'll second it just so we can talk about it.
Okay, I'll start a speaking list, and I just okay. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Wilson, and then Mayor Stewart.
So I understand where Councillor Cirillo is coming from, but you know, on the other hand, I see this as a consequence of the parking regulations, and so I think somehow they've got to be captured. I don't know how best to capture, but I think somehow when it goes to a public hearing, we want the public to have clear information so that they can make an informed comment or decision. And if we don't put bad information in somehow, I worry that they're not going to have all the information, and then they'll come back to us after and say, well, I never knew that you know, you would be able to build townhouses more than 11 meters, right? So if we can figure out a way to get that information out there without being, laid out the same way as it is in this report, I'm great with that. But I'm not doing the consultation or the report.
What our intent would be is to take this away and give a little bit more thought and pose a series of questions, including to C and D. What Councillor Zerlo is intending is to just drop that from the discussion. And so there's just a clear choice for you. Is there a seconder to the motion? And then is there a vote?
He seconds.
Is there a seconder? So just call the vote on that motion.
Okay, just a second. Yeah, we got the debate.
Okay, I'm just trying to.
I'm trying. We're now having a discussion about adding two things, or not having them. So let's just complete that discussion and we can vote on the motion. Mayor Stewart.
Okay, so I don't like D, but I'm fine with it coming back so that I can not like it then, and we can debate it and reject it then. Or not. Ultimately, I don't always get my way. But D, like, for example, I have the floor now and I don't get my way. So I understand where Councillor Zarrillo is coming from. She won't be supporting those if they come back. Or she's inclined to not support them if they come back. And I'm inclined to let them come back so that I can not support one of them, support the other. And I do find them to be integral. But I think her other concern, and she expressed it well earlier, the citywide parking review isn't the right title.
Why? That is one of the questions that is going to come back. Should this be Brick Mountain or should this be Citywide?
No. Should it be parking review? If we're going to deal with changing it to stories of height.
Parking and zoning.
Yeah, so there may be a citywide parking townhouse zoning something.
And consequent zoning bylaw amendments.
Yeah, so that the public's attention is drawn to the fact that it isn't just parking. She's right there that we need to make sure the public knows that this is a bylaw that includes, or rather this is a proposal that includes elements that aren't parking. And which doesn't include the business license for rental.
Okay. I have Councillor Marston next, then Councillor Reid.
I think the mayor articulated my comments very well. I was going to agree with Councillor Zarrillo. It needed to be clarified in the title, and I think the mayor has clarified that. I think the direction's there, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
I want to make it very clear that I want to hear from staff on parking issues over the community, not just Burke Mountain. We're into Coquitlam now. We're going to be into Lower Lougheed. We're going to go. So we got to fly right, and we've got to look at it. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion?
I'm just going to put it out there that I would prefer not to have to go through the motion process in committee as a whole. So I'd rather just be direction to staff. But
you're okay with that?
Being cornered into motion, then that's unfortunately.
You made the motion, but I think but you're happy with it being direction to staff now?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so we can withdraw that and
No, I need to know what direction is being given.
Yeah.
So the motion would be described as direction to staff to not include those two in the final questions coming back. Yeah, still direction to staff, so we don't have to go through.
Because it has to be a vote.
That's just
It has to be a vote.
clarification for the chair. This is the show of hands that we...
Right, it's not really a formal motion.
Because committee can't really make decisions.
Motions and decisions.
So this is to aid staff through a show of hands.
Right.
So the motions are
It's ultimately
in
direction
essence,
to
direction to staff.
Right. Mayor Stewart.
So one of the key ones in the last process was, should this be one bylaw or two? And here, for example, we could say, should we set up one bylaw dealing with townhouses, one bylaw dealing with row houses, or have it all contained in one bylaw, and then have a potentially confusing element in the public hearing. So council contemplates it and says, yeah, I would prefer to consider it as two bylaws or as one. I prefer that. And staff go away and they do that. But the alternative is for us never to be able to tell staff, how would we prefer to see this bylaw look when we get to first reading and a public hearing? The public hearing, for example, the direction was, we could, for example, right now say, by show of hands, does everyone agree it should be a citywide parking and townhouse stories review? And we have show of hands, and everyone agrees that makes it better. or perhaps 6-3. We agree that that makes it better. It presents the bylaw at the public hearing in a way that the public is more likely to be able to engage in it, or more likely to be able to understand it. And so I'm perfectly fine with the show of hands process at this meeting, because it produced really good. I think it produced a result that the public is more likely to be able to engage in, and that is ultimately simpler for our decision making.
So on the direction to staff, Benita gave the direction to staff to take out C and D. Who supports that direction with a show of hands?
Well, sorry, take it out, but how do we capture it ultimately? Like, I want to take it out as long as it's captured some other way.
The motion was the motion.
Yeah.
Just you.
Yep. Okay.
Although it can be taken out when it comes back to us. We
can have that discussion, as the mayor said. We can have that discussion later. Included in the discussion is really what we're saying, and the recommendation was not to include it in the discussion. Those in favor of not including it in the discussion, that's Councillor Zarrillo, and nobody else. So that direction fails, and we go back to the original plan, and I think staff has the direction, and we'll have this discussion next time.
Move adjournment.
Second.
Sorry, just a second. Councillor Zarrillo.
I just have one question. How long did it take for this parking review to come to this committee since we first started talking about it? Does anyone know how long? How long you've been working on this project?
You're talking parking since I got
Michael, when was it assigned to you?
Through the chair, at the end of last year, there was direction given to staff to come back with a citywide parking review that was more comprehensive than just Northeast. So from December to this date, it took us to review the parking. And in the interim, we did review a whole bunch of other things like storage and the stuff listed in attachment 4, but realized that that would draw out the process even longer, and there was a need to bring back immediate amendments, and that's why this is here today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion to adjourn, which was made by Councillor O'Neill. It was seconded by Councillor Towner. All in favor of adjournment? Any opposed? That is carried. We're adjourned.